So, Paul, why would she invade Taiwan?
It is usually more clear and better indication if we just watch their behavior, their building of their military, the massive scale, and the path in which they modernize the People's Liberation Army. So people can speculate why China would want to take Taiwan. It can be nationalistic reason, going from their 100 years of humiliation, saying this is a way to get back at what they perceive as humiliation. Or it can be realistic strategic calculation. They need Taiwan if they want to secure their maritime domain here and there, and to prevent the United States from choking the lifeline, and which is the coastline of eastern China. But again, that no one knows for sure what made them to propel them to make all this decision to do the kind of things that they're doing now. But what we can do is to watch what they are doing and say, here's the evidence, they are doing this, they're doing that. So we have to prepare with regard to what they are doing.
So what is the case for being worried?
The past crisis in the Taiwan Strait was the 1996 missile crisis. At the time when Li Hui was the president of Taiwan, when Jiang Zemin was the leader of CCP. And people now, they say that this was the closest point where there could be a war breakout between Taiwan and China. For those familiar with the military balance between Taiwan and China, at that time, it was pretty clear that there was no chance that the PLA could have succeeded in waging a war against Taiwan in 1996. The military balance was just so off in Taiwan's favor. The Air Force and Navy, and not to mention the Taiwanese army at the time, had 500,000 standing troops. There was just no chance that the PLA could have succeeded in any kind of open warfare against Taiwan at that time. Now, but everything changed in the last 20 years. The PLA has built up their navy almost from zero to now that they are the second strongest navy in the world, and possibly the strongest. Yeah, if you're just talking about East Asia, and their army is the PLA ground force is also immensely modernized compared to what they had 20 years ago, and the Air Force, they are also completely revamped, and they are building up the stealth fighter jets, which Taiwan doesn't have and is not going to have because Taiwan opted to buy the F-16V, which is not going to have any stealth performance compared to the latest generation fighter jets that China, they have been experimenting. They have not yet mass produced those J-31s and other stealth fighter jets, but it is almost certain that they will start to do so as the development, as the testing, and that everything is mature, which is probably going to happen in the next few years. And when they are finished, Taiwan is going to be outgunned. The only thing that will stand between Taiwan's democracy and China's military might is the Taiwan's foot soldiers, which right now is 90% of Taiwan's standing military. And the thinking so far in Taiwan, even among the military, is the priority have been focused on Taiwan's Air Force, then Navy. The Army is the most neglected part of the equation. The defense planners in Taiwan, they put so much premium into what Taiwan's Air Force can accomplish. The problem is that the PLA plans to use their ballistic missiles to paralyze most, if not all, of Taiwan's airbase runways, and their accuracy and effectiveness have been greatly increased in the last 20 years. So there's a very high chance that at the onset of conflict, that those runways are going to be paralyzed, if not destroyed. And those expensive fighter jets, they are not going to be able to get into the air. And the PLA will have very strong, if not complete, air supremacy over the strait, and which means Taiwan's Navy will run for cover. They will send a fleet out there to the Pacific Ocean, just so they will avoid being hit by Chinese missiles and Chinese aircraft. And that also means that the Taiwan's army will be the only thing standing there. So, and that's a huge problem because Taiwan's army right now, it is not ready to fight. It's not combat ready. I'm afraid I have to say this.
What are the other potential scenarios?
If they go for other scenario, which might be, for example, taking Taiwan's outer island, they could launch an assault and take those islands there while still not opening fire across the strait. That could be another scenario. But at the end of the day, if they want to militarily subjugate Taiwan, if they want to establish to defeat Taiwan's military, they will have to deal with Taiwan's air force. There are also other scenarios people talk about, like cyber attack, like sea blockade, along with other scenario, or maybe they will not do any of these things like island blockade or taking outer island. They will simply issue an ultimatum. Some people have also mentioned that. For example, they give a day, like in 90 days we will attack. If President Tsai, if the current administration of Taiwan doesn't sign some form of agreement, doesn't agree to certain items, this and that, the POA will attack in say 90 days or 120 days. What happened next is obviously a huge capital outflow, the stock market collapse, and shortage of an energy crisis and everything in Taiwan. That alone might do the job. That might force Taipei's leadership to negotiation table and sign some form of agreement. Again, then this is another scenario that could have happened. But in any of these scenarios, I think the fact that Taiwan doesn't have a solid, not just solid, but like an effective ground force that can defend Taiwan properly, that is a huge disadvantage in any of these scenarios. Because the Chinese the CCP leadership knows if we can defeat Taiwan's air force and also navy to a lesser extent, if we just control the air and the sea, there's not much that Taiwan can cling hope on, because the army is just not going to stand on its own feet if any POA troops get on the island.
Can you tell the story of recent suicide and what it helps to illustrate about the current state of the Army's military readiness?
Yes, the Lieutenant Huang, he killed himself a few months ago back in April. What's interesting about this case is, well, unfortunate about this case, that Taiwanese media didn't pay much attention to it, especially compared to another case, the Corporal Huang case back in 2013, the Hong Chong Chiu case. There was a corporal in the army, Corporal Huang. He was bullet. He was hit by his superiors in the company, and then they sent him to confinement, and then he died there after some very severe training. Well, it's not really training; it was just like putting them through hell. And then he died, and that ignited a huge protest across Taiwan. Tens of thousands of people took to the street, and that was 7 years ago. At the time when Kuomintang was in power, the DPP at the time was in opposition. There was this huge protest against the KMT for the death of a soldier, but now the same thing happened, and there wasn't any protest, or the media only reported a few stories. It just seemed that no one cared. And that's very unfortunate, because for me, Lieutenant Huang's case this year, it is even more condemning to when you look at the circumstances in which he died, because like Corporal Huang, who was a conscript who was serving his military service. Lieutenant Huang, he's a volunteer soldier. Before this year, he served 5 years in the army as an enlisted soldier. He was a brilliant soldier. He got promoted to officer, and then for some reason they put him in charge of logistics, and then he came across the problems that most logistic officers have, which is a whole bunch of things missing or broken in his depot. And there are two ways you could deal with it if you are in that position. One way is, of course, you continue to cover up. You write fake numbers. You just report things that exist, which is not there. This is one way to deal with it. Another way, you could buy those parts with your own money, which is what he did. He had been trying to do that for many months before his death, and still his superior officers in the brigade, he was not, because he was pretty new to the unit, and the other officers, they pretty much, or I would say, abuse him. That, in fact, I actually interviewed his brother, who showed me that other material that during his time just months prior to his death, that he was doing the kind of job that's supposed to be done by 4 or 5 soldiers. And in the end, he just, I couldn't take it anymore and killed himself. But the whole thing is, if you after my report was published, there was a huge reaction in Taiwan's veterans community. Like hundreds of thousands of people, they just commented on these other Newsland's website and also their Facebook posts. They all of them are complaining that when I serve, this is what happened. This is exactly the thing that happened to me when I served here or there 5 years ago, 3 years ago. Now, like hundreds of these kind of comments. So this is not isolated incident. This is typical of Taiwanese military, especially the army.
Sure. So how does this story connect to the transition from a transcription to an all-volunteer force?
25 years ago, in 1996 missile crisis, Taiwan's military has 500,000 troops. Right now, Taiwan doesn't even have 200,000. So it is a 70-80% cut over 2 decades. They try to maintain as much.
Can you start off with talking about the politics of that decision at the time?
Because the military service was a widely disliked system. For a variety of reasons, you have military service in South Korea and Israel as well, and also other places. But in Taiwan, it is the general feeling is the military service is just a waste of time. It doesn't aid to a man's career. That, especially like the complaint was it was too long. It was like 2 years something. When I served in 2010, 2011, it was only 1 year. And after 2015, I think it was shortened to 4 months. And 4 months means that essentially the conscripts they are bringing in will leave then 2 months after they finish their training. And that means that they only send these conscripts to some auxiliary unit or places that they don't expect to see to be the frontline troops. Even if they are sent to frontline troops, these conscripts, because they will be leaving in 2 months, so they are not given serious training. That's just a matter of fact. Because if you are a sergeant in a field unit, you are not going to waste 2 months of your time training a batch of soldiers who will be leaving in 2 months. You will focus on the volunteers that you have, which right now compose most of the sending troops in the army. So this transition from conscription to all volunteer force, it has a profound impact on how the military structure their force.
Paul, can you come back to the idea in the 90s that military service was a waste of time? Like, everyone sort of gripes about it, but the threat to Taiwan is just as real as the threat to South Korea or Israel. So was it sort of a institutional failing that it didn't provide people with, skills and training that they could use in their later life? These other countries are democracies too, right? So like, what made it shake out in such a way that the politics led to the force hollowing itself out?
So even 20 years ago, the Taiwan's military had 500,000 men at a time. It looks pretty powerful, a very huge chunk of this force. But you could see that the problems were already there. The culture of the military, of the Taiwan's military, was developed during the Kuomintang era. So when Chiang Kai-shek brought the nationalist troops into Taiwan, the military was not designed to be a professional kind of standing army, because Chiang Kai-shek was fighting the civil war against the Chinese Communist Party, and that experience that focus on fighting the PLA define the Taiwanese military, and also because of the fact that the Kuomintang was an authoritarian regime for decades. The Chiang Kai-shek's fear was always that someone in the military would start a coup against him. He put in a lot of emphasis maintaining how to control the military from where he stands, how to prevent someone from in the military from taking initiative. So in this way, you can see the tradition of Taiwan's of the ROC military was it's more like an internal control force rather than a professional military, and that tradition continued until this day. If you look at how they structure their training, how they structure their reserve force, how the focus of their exercise and other things, and that's a huge problem because if you are a young man, young Taiwanese man, you have to do this military service things, and you expect that you will be trained as a soldier. You will learn how to operate weapon, how to be part of a force that can engage enemy in a modern battlefield setting and to fight for your own country. But all these expectations, right? So these are legitimate expectations of what someone who signed on for military service should expect to receive. But what most people serving the military, their experience deviate very much from this general expectation. Instead, they are mostly wasting time doing things that most people would consider wasting time. For example, if you are in the army, you'll be on standby for roll call for as many as 15, 20 times a day, just to stand in the assembly ground every 2 or 3 hours. I did accounting when I was in the army. I did something like 12 roll calls every day. So which means 4 hours of your time every single day is spent going to the assembly ground, standing there, and be called on your name, and that's it. So that was super stupid. But later on, as I researched more into why something like this happened, then I realized this is actually a sign of the officer corps, especially the non-commissioned officer corps, is a failure on their part. Why? Because if you have a successful NGO command structure, the NCO and officer, the NCO is supposed to know how many people are present, how many people are here, how many people are there, without doing this many roll calls, right? You are supposed to be able to know to control your force without this kind of spending 4 hours every day in the assembly ground.
Coming back to our scenario discussion, can you talk about the importance of the roles that Japan and the US would potentially play in any conflict?
I think, contrary to what many people believe, Japan is actually more likely to be the one coming to Taiwan's defense if the worst happen and China decides to resort to military invasion. I have this assessment because I think that for Japan, the energy supply line, the maritime, the sea line of communication, and also the proximity in the region, and also their connections to Taiwan. It's everything. It just tells me that they will not stand by and seeing Taiwan being taken. But this is also one thing that Taiwan is not doing well in terms of foreign policy. Taiwan's relation with Japan looks really nice. Taiwanese public have such high have such friendliness toward Japan, and Japanese public also view Taiwan very favorably compared to China, especially. But in terms of actual state-to-state relation, well, Japan doesn't recognize the Taiwan as a sovereign state, and the exchanges so far seem to be it's not a normal state-to-state kind of relation, and there is no communication between Taiwan military and Japan self-defense force. There is no possibility as such. There is no possibility that they can fight together if a war breaks out now. But I think this is going to change. Hopefully, especially my research, my investigation seem to indicate that senior leadership in Japan's self-defense force, they have been seriously thinking about this issue. But again, the political obstacle is there. That especially for now, the political obstacle is that the Japanese Diet, their parliament, is just not. They are just not mobilized to move things in Taiwan's favor, which is strange because considering that Japanese public have such high view of Taiwan.
Yeah. It's interesting about the ultimatum idea and how that would get in those 90 days. A lot could happen on the diplomatic side, I would imagine.
Right. And I think for me personally, I still think the ultimatum scenario is among the less likely because it is not consistent with what I observed the CCP went to war in the past. If you look at the past history, they tend to focus surprise. They tend to focus on going in there quick, going in there fast without you expecting them. And if they go for the ultimatum kind of scenario, then they will lose the element of surprise. And also, if the thing with ultimatum is if you issue a threat, say I will do X if you don't do Y. This actually constrain your range of options. Why? Because people are now be looking at you. Okay, if the other person doesn't do Y, you have to do X. Otherwise, your credibility is blown. No one will take your threat seriously from now on. So if they issue a 90-day ultimatum, they will have to put out a pretty convincing kind of attack to just to make a show. Otherwise, no one will believe the CCP's credibility from that point on. So that is one thing that why I think that the ultimatum is less likely. I think more likely is surprise attack scenario, taking Outer Island.
Sure. Paul, could you talk a little bit about the process of reporting on Taiwan's military?
I'm not affiliated with any major Taiwan media. I'm an independent reporter. They seem to have a culture of only talking to the media that they like to talk to, and that is the major media in Taiwan. But even in terms of their relation to Taiwanese media, what I can say here. The United Daily, which is one of the largest newspaper in Taiwan, I know for a fact that some of the defense reporters with the United Daily, they have been put on surveillance by Taiwanese government. Why I know this? Because these defense reporters in the United Daily, they have received notice from Taiwanese government telling them that they have been subjected to communication surveillance. So per Taiwan's law, if the government put you on surveillance, they have to tell you 1 year after they started that surveillance, and
That's very polite.
well, imagine the day that if you were as a reporter and you have to talk to that many sources, you have to keep the identity of many of your sources secret. But then on one day you just receive a notice saying we have been spying for 1 year, and it's not just one. Okay, it's two of them, two defense reporters with the United Daily.
Please subscribe to China Talk at glow.fm/China Talk. Also, hire me, preferably full-time, but consulting gigs work too. My email is in the show notes. Thanks so much.
Paul, could you briefly tell the story of Han Kuo-yu and the mainland social media effort to you reported on to help get him elected?
Right. That story was 1 year ago, but it felt like a lifetime ago. As Han Kuo-yu right now he was just booted out of Kaohsiung, and it doesn't look like he will make a political comeback. His political career is over. But there was a concrete effort, as my investigation showed in my first article for the foreign policy, that Chinese cyber groups were trying to help his re-election, or his election to the mayor in 2018 election cycle. But looking back at this story, especially looking at the development in the last year, Taiwan had a legislative and presidential election in January of 2020. I personally did not notice a concrete effort, social media campaign, such as what we had in 2018, happened in 2020 cycle. That's from where I observed. If and my general feeling is the CCP didn't put as much focus into that campaign in 2020 compared to 2018. For why I don't know. If I can speculate, I would say maybe they saw how the election was going. They look at the polls and then they decided Han Kuo-yu was just not electable, or it could be that something changed their mind concerning Han Kuo-yu, who was the presidential candidate of Kuomintang last year, which made them change their support. They just stopped supporting him, or maybe they actually never supported him from the beginning. They were just trolling. Well, which could be the case, because same thing I think the same thing happened to Han Kuo-yu from 2018 to 2020. The CCP likely helped Han Kuo-yu in 2018 cycle just because they were trying to see if they can have something else, have some to like maybe they saw Han Kuo-yu and said, "Oh, this guy's interesting. He says something that we like," as opposed to the things that President Tsai say, which we didn't like. So let's help his campaign a little bit using our ability, using the toolkits that we have, and see how things would develop. And after he became mayor after 2018, throughout 2019, his record just disappointed the CCP. And so they say, well, we're not going to help this guy anymore. I think that's what happened.
Last thing, Paul, you mind contrasting the wolf warrior diplomacy to how Taiwanese diplomats play on Twitter and Facebook?
If we look at the wolf warrior tweets that Chinese diplomats put out, we think they're silly. We think they are self-defeating. We think that they piss off more people than they persuade. For them, they might serve a purpose. They might be, for them, they might view diplomacy in a very different way than we presume. And I think the same thing is happening with the current Taiwan government's diplomacy efforts. What really caught my eyes was a few weeks ago, Taiwan's representative to the United States, Xiaobi King, she tweeted out a video of like a PR video made by Taiwan's Ministry of Nation Defense. So it's just like a propaganda video with cheesy music and like all kind of slogan. Taiwan is going to defend ourselves. We are strong. We are this X and Y. And she tweeted that video, and with I forgot the exact wording she used, but something along the line of Taiwan is ready. China can come, and we are ready. To me, that is such an irresponsible tweet. That is such an irresponsible way of messaging, especially to international audience. And because no one can be ready for war, okay? No one can be. You have not, least alone, sitting diplomat of Taiwan should be out there and telling the international audience that Taiwan is ready for this, and that. No soldiers, no serious soldier and officer, no serious defense or writer will ever say that our country is ready for war. You will never be ready for war. The true nature of the war is that when it breaks out, it is going to surprise you. Okay, it's going to go nasty. It almost always does. No matter how well prepared you are, no matter how much you think how many offensive weapons, how trained your troops are, what kind of exhaustive plans you have already prepared, laid out, things don't go your way and people die. So for a diplomat to say, we are ready for this, I don't think that's a proper way of messaging. But apparently that's the current kind of rhetorics and messaging that Thai government's diplomats are putting out there. To me, I don't think that's helpful for international image. I think if you want to convince the world that Taiwan can defend itself, that Taiwan can stand against China, you should be more prudent. You should actually focus on fixing Taiwan's military before you go out there and say and tell the world that we are ready. We are not. As a matter of fact, we are not. Even if we are, we shouldn't say we are. And the officers that are many of the senior officers, retired senior officers, and also defense writers in Taiwan, thinkers in Taiwan, I talked to, I think they would concur with my feeling here that if you are a serious defense watcher, you try to not to be a chicken hole, meaning someone who's focused on pretending to be tough, pretending to talk tough, because people who actually know military, people who actually know war, they tend to know that it's going to get nasty.
Paul Huang, thanks so much for coming on China